So there are many people wondering what happens to government policy. Big decisions such as Heathrow's third runway, HS2, they're put on hold pending an expected Remain victory. It's not only whiplash reforms that are in the pipeline. And I just heard this morning, actually, that the decision on Heathrow has been deferred until the new leader has been elected. Half of this presentation actually has been had to be updated within the last 48 hours. Everything keeps changing at such a pace. So what happens to what was promised? And does everything else simply fall away, or will there be some business as usual activity? Well, I mean, no easy answers to this really, but there's plenty to discuss, and I'll go through the various political factors that will influence the progression of these reforms specifically. So as I mentioned, these reforms were announced in the Autumn Statement 2015 by the Chancellor and endorsed by the Prime Minister. So although responsibility in progressing these reforms sit with the Ministry of Justice, they emanated from number 10 and number 11. And that's quite important in the context of, kind of what we're looking at now in leadership. The consultation's been repeatedly delayed, so it's reasonable to assume, I think, that the consultation's probably ready to publish. We know that Cameron intends to leave number 10 before the Conservative Party conference in October, and it was only a few months ago that Osborne was seen as a likely successor, but on Tuesday he announced he's ruling himself out. So neither Osborne nor Cameron will be there anymore. So where does this leave the reforms? Well, in his resignation speech on Friday morning, Cameron confirmed that he and the Cabinet would be taking forward the important legislation that we set before Parliament in the Queen's speech. But any references to justice reform relate to a British Bill of Rights and criminal justice only. But these reforms do fit into the Conservative government's cost of living agenda, putting more money into people's pockets. So ultimately, the urgency with which the whiplash reforms are taken forward may depend upon, the importance placed on that by the new Conservative leader. So when will we see this person in post? I'll go through the process. So the process for this is as follows. Nominations for Tory leadership, they opened yesterday evening and they'll close at midday today. MP ballots will be held every Tuesday and Thursday, following until only 2 candidates are left. This means the first MP ballot will be on the 5th of July, then on the 7th of July, and then 12th and the 14th if necessary. And in each ballot, the candidate finishing last is eliminated. So this continues until 2 candidates are left. And these 2 candidates go on to a membership vote, which is likely to be held throughout August, possibly starting towards the end of July. The new leader, and therefore Prime Minister, will be announced on the 9th of September ahead of party conferences. So, this is extraordinarily quick, but these are extraordinary circumstances. And this swift timetable may favour candidates who already have an established base of support within the party. The next Tory leader may seek his or her own mandate from the British electorate, so we may well see a general election this autumn. The new Tory leader, they'll want credibility and authority before entering into these, tense Brexit negotiations with Europe, and that will provide them with the confidence and the backing of the British public. But what happens if someone else wins the leadership and an election is called? So when will this happen? Well, it will probably be in October or November. The government's keen to press ahead with things quickly, hence the short leadership timetable. And the Queen's speech will follow shortly thereafter, probably within the next couple of weeks. This will set out the legislative programme for the next year, and that will include details of Brexit. And, there is a risk that the Tories will lose their majority in the Commons, but it won't have escaped you that there's a little bit of trouble going on in the Labour Party at the moment. So it's difficult to imagine that they'd win a general election anytime soon. So let's assume the Conservatives remain in government. What else might influence the Autumn Statement reforms? Well, the timing of the trigger of Article 50, that will play a part. Legislation to extricate ourselves from the EU, that will no doubt dominate parliamentary time. Estimates suggest that Parliament may need to pass 70 bills as part of the Brexit process, and actually a lot of others say that that's a really conservative estimate. Remember, there are over 40 years' worth of EU legislation that we'll need to be addressing, and that's no easy task. The Article 50 trigger sets the 2-year clock ticking, so legislation will need to be passed within this window, and other legislation will need to be slotted in between this, if possible. So like I said, there's a lot of policy that's currently on hold. These reforms form a part of many other pieces of work that were on the government's agenda, so it's kind of a prioritisation exercise, really. The Ministry of Justice will also need a bigger in-tray. I mean, it goes without saying that the legal work required for Britain to leave the EU will be considerable. The MOJ will be carrying out a lot of this work, which departments and how much of a distraction it is in the immediate future remains to be seen. But, remember this with the reforms. A lot of the work has been done. The consultation, we can assume, has been drafted, all the impact assessments, and that's what takes, the longest amount of time, I'm told. That's already been carried out. And there is a part of this that requires primary legislation and therefore parliamentary time. But a lot of the detail around the safeguards of the small claims track limit, and indeed raising the small claims track limit itself, that can all be achieved through secondary legislation. So the million-dollar question is the will there to get on with this? Well, Lord Foulkes is the Justice Minister in charge of these reforms, and he is on balance unlikely to move post, I'd say. If we assume the Conservatives stay in power, the new government will want to maintain continuity where they can. But we can expect delays. That's, almost certain. October 2017 is the earliest that implementation can happen, and those were the thoughts, really, before the Brexit vote. And if the consultation doesn't appear before summer recess starts on the 21st of July, we can expect further delays as the new government assesses its priorities. But remember, Lord Foulkes has expressly stated that he's keen to see these reforms implemented. So assuming he stays where he is, these reforms might not necessarily completely fall by the wayside.